said, can we sort of dive right into it? Can we talk about some of those issues that artists should be aware of?
Yes, let's do it.
Maybe if we could start, do you want to start with streaming? I know that was one of the issues that Lex brought up that we could talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, streaming in general, it's kind of funny where we're at. A couple of years ago, artists were terrified of streaming. They didn't want anything to do with it. And now artists are begging us to help them understand how to get their music featured on Spotify playlists. So
Yeah.
it's the music space has changed a lot in the last couple of years, and also understanding of what these platforms are doing. And, the one thing that artists need to be very much aware of is that we're moving away from a buying economy and moving into a playing economy.
Right.
And that may seem like, yeah, duh, but there's a lot of things that go with that. And the one thing that's been really cool to see with Spotify, and we distribute over 650,000 artists, so we have a lot of data that we're looking at and a lot of trends that we can see that are fascinating. And the one thing that is that a lot of artists going into the world of streaming thought, oh, my last album I had 5,000 album downloads, so those same people are all I'm going to get, and I'm going to get 5,000 listens on Spotify. And people were making the mistake that the purchase of a download was equal to a stream. And that's where a lot of I think some of the misinformation about what artists should be paid and how these platforms work has come from. But what we've seen is that when you're in a playing economy, it's so much easier as an artist to just get your fans to push play, get people trying things out that they may not have otherwise. I listen to far more music now than I ever would before if I had to go into a store and only select a couple CDs that I could buy. So what we're seeing is across the board, artists are getting far more plays. The threshold of where that lands is for them is much higher than on average they anticipated. So that it means these platforms are actually driving more listenership, exposing your music to more people. And that, as an artist, at the end of the day, that's what I want. Because if people are listening to my music, if it's good, success will come. If it's easier to get people listening and my music's good, then, opportunities could be endless. It makes it so much easier to get music in the ears of people that could be potential fans. And, then it's your job to turn them into diehard fans that are willing to do anything, to help support your career. So the big thing, that we've seen with streaming is that it's become such a discovery platform. It's really turned out to have some extremely positive impacts on the artists and their music. Yes, there's still work to be done to figure out the economics and what the long-term economics should look like. But from my perspective, I get frustrated when I see so many negative headlines about streaming that want to burn the whole thing down because they want to see different pay structure. And a lot of the independent artists, myself included, because I'm an artist as well, are saying, wait, hold on a second. Let's not destroy a platform that's working. Let's just have some, civil conversations about how we can get to an ecosystem where everyone's getting what they should.
Yeah, no, that all makes sense. I mean, with that said, let's sort of leave the economics aside for the moment. We can come back to that if you want. But in terms of actually getting a significant number of people to listen to your music on a platform like Spotify, let's say you're a relatively new artist and you go to CD Baby, you upload your CD or EP, it's going to be distributed to Spotify, obviously. But from there, how do we as artists actually go about driving traffic? Do you have any tips as far as that goes?
Yeah. The first thing I would point out, not only have we moved to a playing economy, but we've moved to a platform-based industry, which is also another thing where it seems like, oh yeah, of course, that's obvious. But people are still acting like their fans need to go into a store and experience the music, and the same thing happens where they go, something's sitting on a shelf, unless somebody goes to that store, nothing's going to happen with my music. So these platforms actually have specific ways that they're intended to be used, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Spotify, Apple Music, SoundCloud, Pandora, and some of them have some extreme advantages to the artist if you actually pay attention to how the platform is designed and intended to be used. So for example, like on Spotify, there's algorithms that power a lot of activity for your music. So there's things like the Discover Weekly playlist. So every user that's a Spotify user, Spotify automatically pulls together a weekly playlist of music they think you'll like based on listening habits and listening habits of people like you. So right off the bat, things like that really are triggered more and more the more you release music. So it's really to your advantage just from starters on a lot of these platforms to make sure you're consistently releasing music. So if you release an album and then disappear for 5 years and then release another album, you're going to have a harder time doing a lot of getting these algorithms to really start recommending your music, as opposed to somebody who's releasing an album, maybe releasing a couple singles a few months later or over the course of a quarter. So first off, getting more consistent releases is really good. I still think there's immense value in releasing a full album. In fact, it's interesting how Spotify still features albums separately from singles. So when you're looking at an artist's page on Spotify, it still very much features your latest albums over your latest singles.
Okay.
But releasing more consistently really helps prime the pump for some of that automatic stuff happening in the background that you didn't even know was there, whether Discover Dailies, Discover Weeklies, a lot of the playlists that Spotify has, a lot of them are actually created by algorithms. So that's one thing, releasing more frequently and then understanding that these platforms have a lot of things happening in the background and are intended to be used a certain way. YouTube's another one where if you use YouTube the way they tell you to, I mean, they're very open about how they want you to use YouTube. It's not just because they want to just, have everybody do what they want them to do. It's like, this is how the platform's intended to be used. If you use it this way, you'll see more success for what you do here. So beyond that, releasing music, diving into understanding the platform, I think on Spotify, playlisting is huge. And we've seen here at CD Baby, a lot of artists get featured on a giant playlist and go from basically obscurity to making $80,000 in the course of like a year and a half. We actually got an artist story featured in the New York Times where that's basically what happened. And it was interesting to look inside his CD Baby account and see that, yeah, the album came out. It was sat basically for a year. It got very little traction. And then an editor at Spotify found it and liked it and put it in 2 of their playlists. And it just shot straight up. And he was getting some nice paydays and lots of streams and exposure. So wow. Getting in a playlist can be very helpful. And the chances of getting featured in, one of the main Spotify playlists is slim. But there are thousands and thousands and thousands of playlists on Spotify, most of them created by just average users. And it's so much easier to go down a couple levels and find these playlists that may have 10,000 followers and reach out to those curators and say, hey, would you mind adding me to your playlist? And in exchange, I'll email all my fans to check out your playlist. So we'll get some exposure on your playlist and you'll get some exposure for your playlist to our fans. And so when you kind of start looking at things of like, okay, let's get beyond the massive Spotify giant playlists that are hard to get to. Let's go down a few levels. Let's find some much more accessible playlist creators and let's offer them something in exchange for adding our music to their playlist. So everybody wins. So there's some strategies like that require you to understand how these platforms work. We get artists all the time that just go and they distribute their music. It's on Spotify. They go, nothing's happening. I'm not added to any playlists. I'm not doing anything. And they have no idea. They don't even have a Spotify account themselves. So they haven't even really used the platform. And like,
Right.
We're in a world it's not like putting music on a shelf anymore. If you want success on Spotify, you need to go figure out how Spotify works. If you want success on Amazon, totally different ecosystem, and you need to understand what's happening over there and how music is being featured and moved around and how people are discovering things. So same with Pandora, same with all these platforms, and it requires a little work, but once you do it, sometimes you can find some things that are really working for you.